Michelle from Ascent Bath & Body, and welcome to another soap making video in collaboration with Cosy Owl. Because it's that time of year when love is in the air, we're going to make a heart embedded soap. So we're basically going to make two soaps. We're going to make some small hearts that we're going to colour pink using a clear soap base, and then we're going to use a white soap base to make the main bar of soap. I'm going to show you how to put the pink hearts inside. So let's go and make some soap.
So here is everything we need to make our heart embedded soap. We have two different kinds of soap base. We have our clear base, which we're going to use for the hearts, and we're going to colour pink. And then we have our white soap base, which we're going to use for the main part of the bar. I have my chopping board, I have a sharp knife, I have two different kinds of soap moulds. I have the small heart mould, and then I have the individual round cavity moulds that I'm going to use for the main part of the soap bar. I have my thermometer, I have two different kinds of scales. I have jewellery scales which I use for measuring a small amount of ingredients such as mica, and then I have normal kitchen scales for measuring out the soap base. I have two small pots, one for mixing the mica and one for measuring the fragrance oil. I have a bottle of rubbing alcohol, and the fragrance oil I'm using in this soap is Red Roses fragrance oil from Cosy Owl. I have two different pots. I have a large and a small. The small I'm going to use for the hearts, and the larger one I'm going to use for the main bar of soap and the white base. And then I'm wearing gloves, as you can see, because we're handling neat fragrance oil. And then I've got my double boiler, which is my induction hob, and my pan of hot water. So the first thing that I've done is I've opened the tub of clear soap base, and I've measured out 80 grams of soap base, and this is going to be for the heart, so we don't need a lot of soap base for this one. I'm going to chop this up into small cubes. It's always a good idea to chop your soap base into cubes before melting, as it makes it melt much quicker and much more evenly. So I'm going to pop these chunks into my small jug, and then I'm going to put that in my pan of boiling water to melt down. I've only got this on a low to medium heat, and there's not a lot of soap base in here, so it'll probably only take about 5 minutes to melt down. So my soap base is now fully melted, and I've turned off the heat and just left the jug sat in the hot water, just so I can keep the soap base liquid while I do other jobs. So I'm just going to check the temperature to see where we are with it, and we're at 73, which is fine. Try not to heat your soap base to anything higher than 75, as you may scorch it. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to measure out my mica powder, and I'm using peach pink mica powder from Cosy Owl for this soap. And you can add your mica straight into the soap base. However, you might find that your finished soap looks a little bit speckled if you've not mixed it properly. So I always like to add a little bit of rubbing alcohol to the mica and to make a paste to add into the soap base. So I use my jewellery scales for this, as it's a small amount, and I'm looking for quite a strong colour on this. I think a nice bright pink against the white will look lovely. So I'm going to add mica at 1%. And I've got 80 grams of soap base that I've melted down, so 1% will be 0.8 grams. So this is what I'm going to measure into the pot. So that's about 0.8 grams. So what I'm going to do next is I'm going to take my bottle of rubbing alcohol, and I'm going to spray just a tiny amount into the pot with the mica in, just enough to make a paste. There's always a little mica cloud when you do this, so just be careful. So you can see just a few squirts is enough to make the paste, and then I mix it round so that it's smooth. Don't worry about the smell at this stage, because your rubbing alcohol will evaporate and you won't be left with the finished smell in your soap. The next thing I'm going to do is measure out my fragrance oil, and in the next section when we come to do the base of the soap, I'll talk to you more about what temperature to add your fragrance oil and what things to check. But for now I'm just going to tell you that I'm going to add this at 2%. So 2% is going to be 1.6 grams, so I'm going to measure this quite accurately again on my jewellery scale. So that's the mica ready and the fragrance oil ready to add into the melted soap base. So I'm going to take my melted soap base off the heat, just checking again what temperature it is, and it's at 67. I need to act quite fast with this because we've only got a tiny amount of soap base in there, and once I take this jug off the heat, it's going to cool down really quickly. It's quite cold in the workshop as well today, so I'm working quite fast here. So I've added the mica in, and I'm giving that a good stir to check that it's properly combined and I've got no clumps. and then I'm adding my fragrance oil in, and again stirring that really well to make sure it's thoroughly combined. And then I'm going to pour straight away into the mould before the soap starts to set. And I'm hoping to get around about 7 hearts from this amount of soap base so that I can do a different design in the soaps for you. So once I've poured the soap, I then get my bottle of rubbing alcohol and I spray liberally across the top to get rid of any bubbles that might have appeared. I'm going to leave these to dry for around about 5 minutes. As you can see, the hearts have dried and I've taken them out of the mould, and they're really bright pink, and they're going to look amazing against the main bar of soap, which is going to be white. So the next thing we're going to do is to make the main part of the soap, and we're going to do a half and half. So half's going to be poured into the cavity, then the heart's going to go in, and then we're going to put the other half in. So I've weighed out 300 grams of white soap base. I've got 150 grams in here that's melting down, and 150 grams here that's all cut up ready to go after we've done the first half. So while we're waiting for that to melt down, I'm going to talk to you about the fragrance oil. Now, 3 things to think about here. The first oil is flash points. Always check the flash point of any fragrance oil that you're using. This one is 93.3 degrees, and so it's quite high. We wouldn't ever want to heat our soap base up to that kind of temperature, as we would be likely to burn it. But when you're adding fragrance oil, make sure that you add under the flash point, as it might be that some of your fragrance oil burns off and you might not be happy with the finished scent in your finished bar of soap. Second thing to note is what temperature to add. Try to add your fragrance oil as near to 60 degrees as you can. Sometimes you do have to add it a little bit hotter if you've not got a lot of soap base, like we saw with the hearts, and you've got to work fast. But 60 is about the optimum temperature. Third thing to check is amount. And for this you need to refer to the IFRA statement, which you'll find on Cosy Owl's website against all the fragrance oils. Now, generally the IFRA statement would be quite generous as to what you can add, but if you're going to have your soap cosmetically safety assessed by a chemist, generally the very maximum that you would be allowed would be 3%. Some fragrance oils are highly restricted and you can only add 1 or 2%, but most of them you are able to go up to 3. The optimum is normally about 2, and I'm going for 2 for this one. But as I say, some you can go up to 3, but just always check your IFRA statement first. So again, I'm going to measure this fragrance oil on the jewellery scale so I can be accurate with it, and I'm going to go for 2%, as I said. So I'm looking for 3 grams of fragrance oil because I've got 150 grams of soap base melting down, and that's going to be ready to add into our soap base once it's fully melted down. First half of the soap base is now fully melted, and I'm just going to check the temperature, and I'm at 65. So I'm just going to give it a good stir, and then I'm going to take it off the heat, and it will carry on cooling. So as I said before, try to add as near to 60 as you can. So I'm going to pour this soap base into each mould up to halfway. As I explained earlier, it's a 2-stage procedure, which is why we're only doing half to start with. So the temperature is now at 61.7, so I'm going to add my fragrance oil in here now, and I'm going to stir really well to make sure that's thoroughly combined. Then I'm going to take my mould and I'm going to pour the soap base roughly up to about halfway for each cavity. So I then get my bottle of rubbing alcohol and spray across the surface to get rid of any bubbles. And I'm only going to leave these to dry for about 10 minutes because I don't want them fully set, and I'll explain to you why in a second. So these are now been left for about 7 minutes, and I've got the other half of the soap base melting down in the pot, and we'll be ready to add fragrance oil to that shortly. As you can see, these look set, but they're still actually quite warm, and I can still press the surface of the soap. When you're layering soap, it's always a good idea just to wait and just long enough until the soap is just set but is still warm, and your layers will stick together a lot better. So I'm going to take my hearts and I'm going to put them in each cavity, and I'm going to be a little bit creative here and do some different patterns. So some I've just put 1 in, and then these others I'm going to try for 2, and I'm just going to press them down slightly into the soap, and then I'm going to spray with rubbing alcohol, which makes our layers stick together better, and it also allows the soap base to stick to the actual embeds better. So I've already added my fragrance oil into here, and I was just keeping this other part of the soap base warm while I was showing you the hearts. So I'm now going to carefully pour around the embeds very slowly, and I'm going to show you what happens when you pour too fast. One goes swimming around. So always be careful and make sure that if you've got embeds like this sat on the surface, make sure you pour quite slowly, and then you can always go back and fill any gaps that you've missed. And then, as before, we spray again liberally with rubbing alcohol to make sure that we break the surface tension and to break any bubbles. And then we're going to leave these to fully set now for around about half an hour before we pull them out of the mould. So these have been left about 35 minutes and they're cold to the touch and they're fully set. So we can pull them out of the mould now. And as you can see, because we poured the second layer when the first layer was still warm, we can't see any join at all. And the heart is fully encased into the main bar of soap. And I've done 4 different designs here, just to show you different ways of setting out your embeds into the soap bars. So these are our embedded heart soaps, and I hope you've enjoyed watching this video, and I hope it's inspired you to have a go at your own heart embedded soaps.